誰も俺を止められね
今度は何？
うわ、何あれ、やばいやばい。
止まれスカタン野郎！
逃げろ。邪魔すんじゃねえ。ママ、
どうなっても知らねえぞ。
I'm literally gonna wait for you. And I see you're gonna be like, nah, I'm not gonna like it. I'm just keep watching.
Just subscribe.
And you think the clip gonna cut right here, but it's not, because I'm still waiting for you to click that like button. And the subscribe and the post notification button.
So 2024 has finally come to a close, and with that means that it's finally time for us to discuss which anime was the best anime of last year. But before we jump into things, I just have to explain a few things of how this list kinda works. First of all, this will be a top 10 list, so we'll be going from number 10 to eventually number 1. But also, when it comes to how I criticize certain things, I'm going to be more critical towards anime that are beyond a first season, because truthfully, these types of discussions should be focused towards anime that are new, and even though there will be anime that are mentioned that are on their 3rd or 5th or whatever season, it's mainly an award or discussion that's focused towards newer anime. And lastly, to keep it a buck, I'm gonna try to be as objective as I can be, but at the same time, sometimes the order will just be based on the fact that I just enjoyed another anime more than the other. And that's pretty much it. So let's begin. So number 10 is The Dangers in My Heart Season 2. Now this season was a very good season. In fact, it took a lot of people by surprise considering what people thought of Season 1. And I think that this anime did a really good job of pushing the romance anime genre up a step in terms of what goes on in high school, dealing with a bit of your insecurities, and trying to understand yourself better as a person. Now, even though this anime was really exceptional, I feel like the only flaw towards it is really focused towards me, because I'm not in high school, and at times the story was really powerful considering that the animation might not be considered the best, but the problem is I just found the subject matter at times to be so really relatable towards someone who's in high school that at times there was a disconnect, and as such I couldn't really place it that high considering how special the season was. Now number 9 is Solo Leveling. Now Solo Leveling was basically the most focused power fantasy I have seen in a while, considering the fact that it filled you with the pure excitement of just watching an individual who was weak get stronger. Now this is nothing new, especially considering the genre, but I feel like it approached it in a really refreshing way that made the season exciting, especially with the dark elements of what would happen. In fact, it's one of the really darkest and grittiest anime of last year. But the flaw within this anime really came from the plot, in which I felt like, yes, it's cool to see him basically get powerful, but eventually I wondered, when does the story itself amp up? And based on what I'm seeing with Season 2, I feel as though Season 2 will be the season that kind of really clinches the idea of solo leveling. Because even though Season 1 was really amazing, I think that the season was really just okay in terms of the story, but it was really good at exciting you with all of the fights and him dealing with some of the darkness that comes with being weak, but then having to work himself towards becoming strong. And as such, it deserves the number 9 spot. Number 8 is gonna be a bit tricky, because this is an isekai in which I said will end up being one of the best isekai ever, but yet it's number 8, and that's Mushokutensei Season 2, Core 2, basically the last season that aired. That season was epic because it carried on the really refreshing perspective of an isekai that I haven't really seen much of, because the cool thing about Mushokutensei is that yes, the individual has another opportunity at getting a new life, but that doesn't mean that everything is changed. And I enjoy the fact that even though the character has become extremely powerful relatively, there's a lot of things going on within his mind that still make him weak. And I found that this season really discussed a lot of those aspects and dealt with them. I feel like this is an anime that will end up being one of the best isekai ever. The only flaw within this season is that Season 1 exists, which basically set the bar so high that there's a lot of things within Season 2 that aren't to the level of Season 1, whether it's animation or just the initial glitz of it. I think that Season 2 did a really amazing job, but the problem is the bar is just so high that even a really good season is just not up to the standard of the first season, and as such it's number 8. Now number 7 is Yakuza Fiancé. Now this might be recency bias or not, but I feel like Yakuza Fiancé was a breath of toxic air, because this was an anime that I didn't know anything about, but by the end of it I loved everything that it represented. It felt like the most toxic soapy that you wanted to watch every single week. In fact, the waiting was the worst part about this anime, because there was so much drama filled in a very toxic story that still to this day I'm not sure is it a romance anime or potentially a really dark drama. But yet this anime was really special, and it offered a more mature approach to certain subjects. Even though they're in high school, which I said it doesn't make sense, it offered a breath of fresh air, and it really played well towards it being a toxic anime, and I enjoyed all of it until it ended. Now the only real negative that I can share about this anime is that, well, they're in high school, which didn't make sense. But besides that, I think that most people will point towards the animation styling. I think that people will either love it or hate it, and as such the best that it can get is number 7 on this list. Now number 6 is A Sign of Affection, which is an anime that I would also say its biggest flaw is within its animation. But what this anime did for me was pretty special. I think that it's always refreshing to find new anime that teach you something as a person, and I found that this anime's approach towards entering into a relationship with somebody who's dealing with a disability, but specifically having to deal with somebody who can't hear, I found that to be really intriguing, because as a person who has never been in that situation, I felt like this anime taught me a lot of things that I kept in my own life, and it's always refreshing to see an anime teach people something, but also allow us to understand a world that some of us might not know or some of us do know. But I felt like it was an extremely good breath of fresh air in which allowed more representation within anime, but also just was awesome. I mean, one of the most coolest aspects of this anime was the fact that it wasn't in high school, which made me extremely happy because I didn't feel weird watching it, but it can only get number 6. And now we get to the top 5, which means that now it's a bit more intense about who gets which spot. Some of these anime just lost out based on the most tiniest of mistakes, but yet they mattered, which brings us to number 5, which is Dandadan. Now for me, Dandadan is probably the passion project of the year. Watching it from start to finish, I felt like this anime really celebrated itself from the opening to the ending, really relating towards the anime, the wackiness, the fun. I felt like Dandadan was one of the most unique anime, but it was also one of the most genuine anime, especially considering how it surprised a lot of people with that episode that took a really dark turn and showed us that Dandadan is able to go to places that we didn't believe it was, considering the fact that its biggest selling point is that it's just this wacky, weird anime. It was able to show a level of maturity that a lot of people, including myself, did not expect, but also a level of darkness that creeped me out still to this day, but was really good. Now, the only real negative that I'll share about Dandadan is that peak of that episode was really amazing, but then after that, it just went back to being goofy and all over the place. That is what Dandadan does, but I feel as though it kinda peaked too early, and as such it felt like the rest of the episodes after that episode were kinda just borderline random episodes, which kinda takes you towards an anticlimactic feeling. But also I feel as though, based on how quickly the next season will be coming up and basically the last few episodes were leading to the next season, I think that Dandadan understands this and will be approaching some of those things next season. So it gets number 5. Number 4 is gonna be dicey because number 4 is the GOAT. Now, Frieren was an anime that took people by surprise. I didn't know anything about Frieren, but by the end of it, I loved everything about Frieren. Even though initially I had a very slow approach to the anime, I didn't initially get it. I found the premise kinda okay, she's dealing with mourning, but it taught me more interesting things in terms of the journey than the overall goal. And I think that that's where Frieren shines the most. It's in taking you in this journey with these characters and you understanding their hardships, but also seeing their growth in certain situations that really allowed me to understand the anime more, in that Frieren is sort of this canvas. Even though she seems to be bland at times or blank, she's basically allowing the cast around her to shine. And I found this to be a very interesting interesting approach because she's the main character. She should be the star. Now the thing is, she does have moments where she shines, but it's ultimately really about the journey and the people around her than it is about Frieren. And I found this passing of time approach to be really intriguing as the anime advanced, and then all of a sudden they basically just had a tournament arc, which is peak. But in terms of the negative that I will share about it, I felt as though at times you can find the anime to not really captivate you at times, considering the fact that it wants to take its time and it really enjoys taking its time. And as such, if you don't have patience, you'll kind of wonder what's the point of this anime and why is it so highly hyped. But I think that this is just an anime that wants you to take its time with it, and it's number 4. Now number 3 might be a little controversial considering the fact that I've been saying a lot of things about high school, but number 3 for me is Makine Too Many Losing Heroines. I think that this anime is special, and yes, it is in high school, but I feel like this anime offered so much beyond what it represented, because this was an anime that dealt with the subject of rejection in such a refreshing way. There were so many different characters that you could find somebody you could relate to, but also as someone who's outside of high school, I found that a lot of the things that they discussed are things that you could relate to at any age. People deal with rejection, people deal with jealousy, people deal with insecurities, but also it did it in such a way that you are allowed to reflect in a good way. And I found that ability to let this anime basically teach you something but allow you to detach from the high school premise to be a pretty special thing. But in terms of the negatives of this anime, well, it's in high school, and at times it can feel as though the latter half of the anime kinda dragged, but that might just be a preferential thing because it focused on one character. To be fair, every character got their moment to shine, so that's just on me. But as such, that anime gets number 3. And number 2 is personally one of my favorites, which is the Apothecary Diaries. It's an anime that basically taught me how to say apothecary. I used to say apothecary, which a lot of people taught me that I shouldn't say. But this anime was captivating from start to finish. It begins with this very generic look about it where you think that it's pretty predictable, it's probably going to be an anime you drop, but it had such a dark element and surprising drama to it that I feel like anybody can watch the Apothecary Diaries. I felt like it was an amazing soapy and drama that kept you captivated every single episode. The twists and turns were so insane. And mind you, this is an anime that came out when Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2 came out and Frieren, but for me personally, it stood out. It felt like the one I wanted to watch the most, considering everything that was happening. Mao Mao as a character was super captivating to the point that you just can't help but fall in love with her as a character. But also, she's the most normal person probably in this entire list based on what she thinks and what she sees. Now she's a little crazy, but we like him that way. And I felt like it was able to take you to a dark place, and for me, I really loved that feeling. But it showed this dark world that basically happens when you are dealing with royalty that I feel as though I didn't know much of. And in fact, it makes you really intrigued within that culture, and it makes you want to learn more about what happens with concubines and all of the things that have happened before. I felt like it was a historical sort of anime that taught you things but also made you intrigued within them so that you go beyond your means and go find out what happens. But in terms of the negatives that I would share, I would say that the problem with this anime is Mao Mao in herself. I feel like at times it can get really predictable in that you know who's going to solve the case. It's going to basically be Mao Mao. It's always her. She knows what's gonna happen and she'll figure it out. But the cool thing is that it later showed that she doesn't always figure everything out, and that just pushed it to another level that made it not so predictable, but most of the time it kinda is predictable. And with that brings us to number 1, an anime to which I believe deserves the crown as being the anime of the year. And based on the anime that it beat, it has to be pretty good. In fact, it has to be something that I deem to borderline be almost perfect. And the thing is, for me, this anime was. And even though I tried to be extremely harsh with my criticism, this anime just couldn't be denied. And I think that number 1 has to be My Hero Academia Season 7. This season was almost perfect. And the only reason why I say it's almost perfect is literally just preference. Like, I just have to try and be fair, but this season had it all. In fact, I feel like this season finally overcame the ghost of the first and second season, in which a lot of people had this hype about My Hero Academia from the beginning, and basically after those 2 seasons people said it fell off. And this season surpassed those seasons because even though it had a lot of action, it was one of the most emotionally heart-tugging seasons that I've seen throughout the year. And that's saying something because all of the anime that I listed probably have a moment like that as well. I mean, it beat Apothecary Diaries, and I didn't expect it from this anime. I felt like the season was filled with so many emotional factors. I don't know how many times I cried over seeing characters get their moment to shine, but also have captivating stories that made you understand them as people, but also take those things within your own life. Literally, while doing the last video of My Hero Academia, my voice was cracking, considering the fact that I was discussing a character I didn't like, but his story was so captivating that I couldn't help but relate to just the simplicity of wanting to make sure that people who believe in you are rectified. This season to me was perfection. It was amazing. It did everything that it was supposed to do, and it surpassed an extremely high bar to which people said that My Hero Academia will never get to. And that says something considering the hype that this anime had. And as such, I have to say that this is the anime of the year. It had it all. It mastered it all. It felt like this anime deserved to be anime of the year.